Hi there, my name's Lynn Keddie and I paint expressively in acrylics. It's really about intuition and memory and just going with the flow. Experimentation is key and lots of practice. Now, I haven't been practicing that much recently because it's been the summer and there's been lots of other things going on. So today, what I'm doing is I'm painting on paper, which is quite a thick paper with highly textured, and just trying to get back into the swing of things. So do join me as I paint these two country scenes, let's say. I'm using these colours are ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, titanium white, cadmium yellow pale, lemon yellow, some magenta and some quinacridone magenta, and a little bit of raw umber. Now, I'm just getting going, painting the sky with a mix of cerulean blue and white, just to get a feel for things going on, really. I think when you've got a blank sheet of paper or canvas, it can be quite daunting. So I always just go straight in there and get going. This paper is very highly textured, and if I'm honest, I'm not sure I like it particularly. The paint doesn't really flow over it as well as it does on a canvas or a wooden surface or even a less textured paper. But I've started, so I'll finish. I'm doing a lot of mixing here, just getting the feel for the paint. And I'm going to start with a little bit of the landscape. You can see quite clearly here that the paint is not adhering terribly well to this paper. So I think it's definitely worth bearing that in mind, although I do like experimenting on different surfaces. So here I've mixed a bit of the cadmium yellow pale with ultramarine blue, and you get this deep green. I've also quite often add a little bit of raw umber just to, it kind of makes it more realistic, the green a little bit more realistic, like grass. It sort of takes the saturation down a tiny bit, and I prefer that to using black to desaturate colours. So I'm just moving from one painting to the next quite quickly. I'm not really thinking too much about it other than what I'm mixing. As you can see, like seconds on each. It's quite good fun doing this. It helps you to not become too invested in the final painting because you're painting on two, and you learn things from one that you can then use on the other. Oh yes, my painting started to buckle slightly, and because it's on actually a white shower curtain stuck to my wall to protect the wall from the paint, it does tend to behave strangely sometimes. I'm using frog tape here. That's a decorator's tape. It may have the same name in other countries, but in the UK it's called frog tape, and it works reasonably well, although it did start to destroy the paper when I finally took it off. So I've changed my brush now from the very big decorator style brush to a smaller brush just to get some different marks. And again, I'm really just playing with the paint on the paper. I'm not, I'm sort of thinking about, well, trees, bushes, vegetation, nothing really specific. I think the key here is to use different marks, different brushes, and different tonal values. Something that is very easy to drift into mid-tones whilst you're painting, which is when they're all roughly the same tone, like mid-greys. If you were to turn this into a black and white photograph, then you'd see lots of mid-greys. Well, not this, because I've got some fairly reasonable tonal values in. But if you do photograph your painting and then desaturate it and have a look at it, you can see differences in tonal values very, very clearly. It's much harder to see tonal values when you're painting in colour until you get used to it. So this very vibrant yellow, acid yellow, is quite a light tone, and the green that's mixed with ultramarine and yellow is quite a dark tone. So I try and introduce those at an early stage just to get a feel for the painting, to feel the painting have movement. Definitely if you have good strong tonal differences, your painting will start to feel as though it's alive and it's moving. I'm going back into the sky. This is actually the end of summer, but I'm painting two paintings that have got a spring-like feel because I painted a painting called Swallow's Return. There's actually an associated video of me painting that, and I really enjoyed painting it, and I really enjoyed the feeling that it gave me because it was very spring-like and it was very light and airy, and you know, at that time of the year you're just so looking forward to the flowers blooming and leaves unfurling, that it's just a great time of year. So being able to paint it at that time of year and paint that time of year at a completely different time of year it's actually quite lovely. So some very bold marks with quite a big brush, just to get a feel for trees in the background really, and then I'm going over to the other painting and doing the same. Not exactly the same. I'm sort of blending that in a little bit to get a sense of distance. Sometimes when you're painting like this, you can go over things too much and then you lose the spontaneity. So it's important to, as I always say, make a mark and leave it. And I'm not always the best person to do it either. I learn from my mistakes. So there I'm introducing a really dark colour, and that is ultramarine blue mixed with a little bit of raw umber, and it gives you a really beautiful dark bluey grey. I'm recording this in real time, and it's there's very little editing going on in it, so you can see exactly how I'm approaching this painting. I think I'm trying to get some light colour in here, and you'll see when I've finished the paintings, they look a little bit like they're in the same place, but with different light, and that wasn't actually deliberate, that just sort of came about. One looks as though it's painted in the evening, and one looks like it's painted at dawn. So I've got another brush, a much thinner brush, just again to get some different marks in. And I hold the brush right at the end. I don't hold it like a pen or a pencil or anything. I hold it right at the end. You've kind of got a lot less control, and that enables you to make some really interesting marks. It's useful, if you can, to stand up when you're painting, and the reason for that is that you can paint at arm's length and you can stand back from your work and see it from a distance, and I think that's quite important to do. If you're unable to do that, then do occasionally stand up and look at your work from a distance. I'm now applying some quinacridone magenta, which I've mixed with a little bit of white, and this is to represent blossom. I was working at an exhibition and it was springtime, and I was sitting outside in the courtyard of this very, very beautiful old building. It was an old barn, and it was quite windy, but it was very warm, and the blossom was falling off the trees all around me, and it just looked like confetti, to be honest, but it was absolutely beautiful. So I'm sort of trying to replicate that. And the acid yellow represents the very new growth that you tend to get in springtime. I'm using here my much loved kitchen spatula. There is a link in the description of where you can get hold of one of these. They're as cheap as chips, and they're really great to use. They're very bendy, and for this kind of thing you can make some really lovely marks. I'm mixing different shades of pink, so I've got lighter pink mixed with the quinacridone magenta and white. You could use magenta and mix it with white as well. I just happen to quite like that quinacridone magenta. It's quite a rich colour. I've gone back into the ground, and I've mixed a lilac colour, and that is with ultramarine, lavender colour. That's mixed with ultramarine and a little bit of crimson. I don't think I mentioned crimson, but that does make a really beautiful deep purple colour, which you can then mix with a little bit of white to get a very lovely purple colour, which represents, in this case, bluebells, which also turned up later in the week when I was at this place in the centre of Wiltshire, which is a very beautiful county in England. So again, I'm just working across this painting quite quickly, getting some interest in the foreground with this lavender coloured paint. Should call it bluebell coloured paint, really, shouldn't I? And I will do the same to the other painting. It's quite rewarding painting like this because you do get, because I'm painting so quickly, you do see the results quite quickly. But I do think it's worth having a subject in mind. Sometimes I paint and I don't particularly have a subject in mind, and quite often it goes a bit wonky. Sometimes it works really, really well, but it's a bit hit and miss. In this instance, I definitely have the subject in mind. I'm now very quickly putting blossom into the trees and across the sky, as though it was, just floating out of the sky. And as you can see, I do move very quickly and delicately across both paintings. I'm not really trying to think where these blossoms should be. It's quite rough, and also not too regimented in size, shape, or how close or far away they are from each other. As you can see, I'm standing back and really looking to see how they're looking to see how they're looking, or just seeing how they're looking. Seeing what needs to be done next. Are there any marks that stand out and don't look right? Is the tonal value working? Is the whole painting working as a whole? So you can see at the beginning, I started very quickly with very rough shapes, putting in tonal differences, getting a sense of the landscape. It's in sort of 3/3 in both instances. The top third is the sky, the middle third is the distance, and the bottom third is the foreground. So that gives you a nice balanced composition. The marks in of themselves aren't really anything in particular, but they just work together. And I think when you look at it from a distance, your brain just understands what it's looking at. Now I've got my rigger brush, which is very fine, very thin, long. It's actually a sable brush. You can get them as nylon brushes. And I use that to paint in very fine lines. And I'm sort of swirling it around because in this courtyard there were swallows, and I called the painting Swallows Return because in England the swallows go away over winter and then they come back in spring, and they nest in probably similar places every time. And these birds were nesting in a barn, and they were flying in and out of this barn and around and about this old walnut tree that was standing in the middle of the courtyard. And the only way I could think of that wasn't me painting in swallows was to draw these lines that sort of swish around the painting, and that represents the swallows. So I do this across both paintings, and it's just a mixture of sort of light and dark colours that I've used here. You do need to load your brush very frequently when you're doing this, because not a lot of paint gets on those brushes. And again, it's important to be loose when you do this and not labour over it, otherwise you'll end up with some probably fairly wonky marks. And this just is very loose and expressive. I'm feeling I'm close to finishing at this stage these paintings, and let them dry and come back to them. I always photograph my paintings at each stage, because in photographs you see things that you don't actually, weirdly, see when you're just looking at them on the wall. So you can often spot things that aren't looking right, or imbalances in the painting, or weird shapes, things like that. I've just initialing both of these paintings. Quite often I don't sign or initial the front of the painting, but for some reason today I am. I often just initial, sign it on the back of the painting, particularly if I'm painting on wood. It's difficult to sign a canvas on the back because canvas is a bit weird. Okay, so this is when I finish for this session, and I'm going to come back to this painting when I've had a bit of a think about what I want to do next. And I've decided to splatter some paint on both paintings, just to add just another layer of something, really, different marks, to add interest to the paintings. And this is really representative of tiny flowers or tiny petals falling from the trees. So I'm using a mix of pinkish white, whitish pink, a light pink, there we go. And I get a fairly stiff brush and load it up with paint and then flick it with my finger. And I do this with both paintings until I'm satisfied with the result. This is when having a sheet on your wall is very useful, because paint tends to go everywhere and sometimes it flicks back in your face. So I would always recommend you check your face before you go out. I was painting in my old studio, and I was using red paint. I don't often use red paint, but I was using red paint, and I went to finish for the morning and went to the shops on the way back and picked up something for lunch, And when I got home, I looked in the mirror and I had smeared red paint on my face. It looked as though I'd been beaten up. I don't know why anybody didn't just say to me, are you okay? I don't know what I would have thought they were doing because I didn't realise I got red paint all over my face. But yeah, sometimes you do get carried away and end up with paint where you didn't want it to be. It takes a little bit of time to do this, but it's pretty straightforward. And as I said, it just adds another layer of interest. And these are the two quick sketches that I've done. And let's have a look at the final result. This, I think, looks like morning light. And this, like evening light. Thanks for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this book that I wrote. It's called How to Paint Flowers Expressively in Acrylics. It gives you lots of tips, and there are lots of lovely photographs that you can use as inspiration. Check the link in the description.